Molt bona tarda a tots, benvinguts, benvingudes. Moltes gràcies a tots els que heu organitzat, els que heu participat i els que esteu omplint de contingut, d'idees i de metodologies a aquestes jornades Territoris 360 d'aquest any, encara de pandèmia, no podem dir que sigui postpandèmia, però en què estem forjant el futur i l'esteu forjant des de cada municipi. En primer lloc, volia fer un agraïment per la feina de tots els que heu impulsat les oportunitats educatives en els municipis i des de les entitats i des de les comunitats durant aquest any. La veritat és que nosaltres, quan fa un any va començar la pandèmia, vam temer que aquest seria un any perdut, potser per les oportunitats extraescolars, potser perdut pels infants que no hi podrien participar i sobretot per aquells infants en què s'eixamplarien les desigualtats i potser perdut també a nivell d'aquells objectius de construir ecosistema, d'anar més lluny, de vestir més política pública, més qualitat, més xarxa i més treball conjunt. Aquells objectius més de fer madurar i construir un ecosistema connectat i de qualitat a l'accés de tothom. I la veritat és que sí que ha estat un any de fortíssimes limitacions, en què les oportunitats extraescolars s'han vist molt limitades pels infants i pels joves, degut a les normatives i a la situació que hem tingut, però en canvi podem dir ja que no ha estat un any perdut a nivell de maduració, a nivell de treball, a nivell d'impulsor i a nivell d'ambició. És a dir, ens hem trobat que per part de les entitats s'ha innovat molt, per part dels ajuntaments s'ha seguit treballant i al llarg d'aquestes jornades s'han vist totes les feines que s'han desenvolupat i com propostes inclús agosarades i de futur s'està invertint perquè tot l'aprenentatge extès, tot l'aprenentatge comunitari, no només és una necessitat de futur, sinó que serà encara més una necessitat de recuperar aprenentatges en la postpandèmia. I si en un any tan difícil hem seguit invertint, doncs això és el millor pronòstic que en el futur recollirem tot allò que hem sembrat. Aquesta sessió de la tarda, i vull ser breu per no perdre'ns res de contingut, tenim la sort de tenir a Bela Shah Spooner i a Gislene Tasayco de la Lliga Nacional de Ciutats dels Estats Units. Són dues persones molt interessants. La Bela Shah Spooner és directora del programa Education and Expanded Learning for Youth Education and Families de la National League of Cities als Estats Units. La Lliga Nacional agrupa a més de 20.000 ciutats, o gairebé 20.000 ciutats dels Estats Units, de moltes mides diferents, de moltes realitats socioeconòmiques diferents. I la Gislene Tasayco és especialista sènior d'Educació i Aprenentatge Extès de l'Institut de Joventut, Educació i Famílies també de la National League of Cities. Moltíssimes gràcies a elles dues per posar la seva experiència, el seu saber, la seva visió i el lideratge que han desenvolupat al llarg de tots aquests anys al servei de les ciutats, dels municipis, en definitiva, de tots els que estem aprenent junts per forjar millors polítiques públiques des de l'Aliança. La veritat és que els agraïm molt perquè elles no només desenvolupen un model molt interessant i més necessari que mai, sinó que tenen un recorregut, són un laboratori viu d'aprenentatge, com us dèiem, ciutats molt diferents, en contextos molt diferents i amb propostes molt agosarades, i tenir la sort de disposar avui de l'aprenentatge i de la visió condensada d'aquest enorme laboratori és realment una cosa que els hem d'agrair moltíssim. Tindrem una breu intervenció de cadascuna d'elles, no tindran tot el temps per explicar-nos tot allò que saben i després tindrem un quart d'hora de preguntes i respostes. Us proposem que llanceu les preguntes o a la capsa que trobeu al costat del xat del canal YouTube o en el xat del Zoom. I abans de res us volia fer un avís. Si esteu seguint-nos per YouTube, en el canal YouTube, trobareu que sentireu a la Gislene i a la Bela en anglès, en versió original. Si voleu sentir la versió traduïda, heu de connectar-vos en el Zoom, a la videoconferència per Zoom, que podeu trobar l'enllaç o per Twitter o a la mateixa caixa de YouTube, en el costat a la dreta, han penjat aquest enllaç i podeu passar a la versió traduïda en català. Teniu les dues, sí, si no després també podeu recuperar el vídeo posterior. Molt breument per introduir el tema. La pandèmia a Estats Units com aquí va forçar el tancament generalitzat d'escoles en una interrupció sense precedents de l'escolarització. Això, com dèiem abans, ha agreujat les desigualtats sistèmiques. Són molts els reptes als que cal donar resposta per complir la promesa d'una educació de qualitat per a tots els nens i nenes, tant en bretxa digital com en suport educatiu de qualitat, en activitats enriquides en necessitats habitacionals, d'espais de cura emocional, etc. Les escoles per si soles no poden resoldre aquests reptes i no haurien de fer-ho soles tampoc. Des de les Community Learning Hubs, aquests entorns d'aprenentatge comunitari, després ens explicaran el concepte, però han ampliat, van començar per les escoles de comunitat i ara han passat a la idea dels entorns d'aprenentatge comunitari, que per fer front a tots aquests reptes educatius es requereix acció col·lectiva, un nou nivell d'intervencions coordinades que fusionen recursos locals que ja existeixen, que poden enfortir oportunitats d'aprenentatge i també donar suport a necessitats d'infants i joves tant dins de l'aula com fora del propi edifici escolar, a tota la comunitat. Aquest nivell de coordinació se situa centralment a nivell local, que és on hi ha els líders municipals i els districtes escolars que estan en sintonia amb les necessitats de la comunitat. En aquest seminari ens preguntem què podem aprendre d'aquests entorns d'aprenentatge comunitari, d'aquestes Community Learning Hubs que ens explicaran avui, quines estratègies municipals són efectives i quines estructures són necessàries per garantir la col·laboració d'aquests diversos agents educatius, quines evidències tenim sobre el seu impacte a la millora de l'equitat educativa, tant dins com fora de l'escola o a les seves fronteres, i quines condicions s'han de donar per garantir que aquests entorns d'aprenentatge contribueixen a l'èxit educatiu, és a dir, quines condicions ens calen perquè siguin de qualitat, perquè siguin efectius, i el centre educatiu i l'escola, quin paper ha de tenir dins d'aquesta xarxa comunitària. Bé, com us deia, vull ser el màxim de breu, les volem sentir, estem molt agraïts i molt agraïdes per poder-les sentir i aneu preparant, aneu llançant ja les preguntes, no us espereu al final, les anirem indexant i agrupant una mica i sobretot suposo que les preguntes aniran sobre el què i sobretot sobre el com. Moltíssimes gràcies, Gislene, gràcies, Bela. Endavant.
Hello, everyone. We are so happy to be with you all. It's a pleasure to be with you. And as I was saying to Ismail, I wish we could be with you in Spain. Beautiful country. We love it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get going here. So as Ismail said, we're from the National League of Cities, and we are a national organization that represents almost 20,000 cities, towns, and villages across the country. It is an advocacy organization, as well as an organization that allows us to provide technical assistance to cities to really help them think about all of the issues that cities are responsible for. And Gislene and I sit on our education team, where we have been working with cities across the country to really help them think about how to increase educational equity across their communities and how municipal leadership can play a role to support student success and improve student outcomes. So in the US, our cities do not control the school districts. They don't control the schools. Most of the cities don't. There's probably about 10 to 15 big cities where the mayor controls the school system. But we have been working with cities over 2 decades, 20 years, to really help them understand the role that cities can play. And so it's very important they understand that educational equity and opportunity will help their city be successful. Right? So from public safety, thinking about the health and wellness and mental health of their community, if students are engaged, if they're graduating on time, if they're ready for college, and if they have access to college and are able to complete and get those degrees and credentials, we know that they'll be able to support the workforce of that community, support the economics of that community. And mayors care about that, right? City council members care about that. You want to keep those businesses in your community. And you want to get your young people employed and get them exposed to careers so that they're able to stay in your community and participate in that workforce. So cities have begun to really understand that educational equity is key and really important for them to get engaged in. But how do you ensure, right? How do you ensure that you have opportunities for all? Our communities, I'm sure your communities across Catalonia are so diverse. You have people with higher income, with lower income, new people coming to your country that speak your language, that don't speak your language, different religion, different culture. and different opportunities for sure. So really important to understand that equal does not mean equitable, right? That you're not giving the same thing to everybody because certain people need more support in different ways. So different ways to think about improving access. You want to make sure you're thinking about how that information is being disseminated to different parts of your community. How are they getting the information? How do they get to the opportunities or to the activities or programs? Transportation is always a concern to think about. How can people get there? Not everybody has cars, not everybody lives near the bus or near the train. I'm also thinking about, do people have time to participate in those opportunities? Do families who are working maybe more than one job, do they have the time to bring their young people, bring their children to these opportunities? Of course, thinking about language to make sure everybody understands the information. And then, of course, during the pandemic, we've seen even more so that technology and technical literacy is such an important aspect of this work and has become such a big barrier. So much inequitable distribution of digital knowledge so that young people have been able to participate or not participate in school and in opportunities. And of course, thinking about resources and money that people have and social capital. We don't talk about that as much, but social capital and really understanding who people know, who can help you get into a program, who can let you know about some information. That's also very important. So thinking about all of those different ways to make sure that the opportunities you're creating can be equitably distributed to everybody. We talk about the C's of mayoral leadership. This is also for city council leadership. I know we have many city council members on the line today. So I think about all of these different roles that mayors play, right? They can be a catalyst for new initiative, for people focusing on a certain issue. They can be champion, really speak about it vocally, let people know this is important to the community. They're certainly the commander-in-chief, and they're setting the tone and they're setting the stage about what work is going to happen. They help to convene the community, bring people together that maybe don't normally speak to each other or don't normally partner or work together. I put this word here, carrot. That means that they can give a carrot. In English, we say you're offering incentives. It could be funding incentives, or it could be just an opportunity to get visibility. And they're helping to convince people about why something is important. And in this case, it's so important for cities to take the leadership on this, to talk about why educational equity is so important. And of course, committing resources. When cities are able to actually fund programs and provide investment to support after school, community learning hubs, community schools, we've seen so much benefit. So, we began this work at the National League of Cities really focusing on after school programs, because we know that municipalities are already doing so much in this space with young people around after school. We have our parks and recreation departments, libraries, even the fire and police and environmental agencies. They're doing a lot of outreach with young people across their communities. They may not call it an after-school program, but they're already working with young people, encouraging them to think about these careers, learn about these jobs. Even museums sometimes are under the control of a city, and certainly thinking about workforce investment boards. So it made so much sense to begin with after school. And what we learned over time is that programs across a community are very fragmented. There's one program here and one program over there, and nobody talks to each other. Nobody knows which kids are going to which programs and how those students are doing. And so we have begun to help cities, I've been doing this actually for 17 years, to help cities create what we're calling coordinated citywide after-school networks, after-school systems, where a community is bringing together all of the people that are supporting after-school and summer programs for young people together to talk about, where is your program? What are you offering? How much do you charge? Which students are you accessing? How much extra space do you have in your program? And how can we create a whole system across the community so that young people have access, so families know where the programs are? So you see here the key pieces in the middle of the slide are leadership, data, quality, and participation. Really thinking about collecting that data so you know what the needs are, and being able to even map it out visually using geographic information systems, GIS, systems, to be able to plot out on a map, where are all of your schools? where are all of your after-school programs? Where are your park and rec programs? Where are any of the other programs? And then also, where is poverty? You can get some of that data. In the US, we can get that data from the school district where they can show where some of the higher income or lower income schools are. And you can map out lots of other different elements from your police department. You can get your crime data to find out where is more juvenile crime happening. Is it in this part of the neighborhood? And are there any after-school programs near there? So these are all the questions that you can begin to ask yourselves as a community and look at it on a map. And when you see that map and you see we have so many kids here, we have high poverty here, lots of crime here, and look, all the after-school programs are on the other side of town. So you think you have programs in your community, but maybe they're not in the right places, right? For people who need them. So that's just a very important part of this data piece. And then thinking about quality. We always say that kids can vote with their feet and they can leave a program. And there's a great quote from a program in Providence, Rhode Island, one of the best programs in America, that talks about how a kid said they would walk a mile to a great program, but they wouldn't cross the street for a bad program, right? So of course, location does matter, but the point is that quality matters as well. And so these after-school systems can really help bring all of the providers together to do professional development, to help other providers learn about how to make their programs even better. These are not babysitting programs, right? This is not just a place to keep kids so parents can work, even though that is important. This is an opportunity for students to be able to learn new skills, to be able to develop their interests, to be able to have youth voice and youth agency, to talk about what they need, and of course, to support their academics as well. So you can see this is, the United States, and we have many different cities, big and small across the country. This is not the full picture because every year there are new cities that are developing their systems, but we have many cities across the country that we've worked with that have developed these after-school systems. So strong leadership from their city councils and their mayors for supporting these after-school systems. And just some resources, if interested, you can find them on our website. We get a lot of money from the Wallace Foundation in New York City. And so we've built some reports really talking about municipal leadership for after school and how you need a data management information system to be able to help measure those outcomes, measure the success that those programs are having. Because the more success they're having, the more you're going to be able to convince your city and convince your community that these programs are having value and are important. And then also, we put these briefs together to really show city leaders that after school and summer learning are a strategy, a solution to help with public safety concerns, a solution to help prepare students for college and career, and to help think about workforce and economic development. Because we know sometimes cities are not thinking about after school. We're so impressed with all of you who have been focusing on this issue, knowing that after school programs and summer programs are so important, thinking about the equity of educational opportunity for young people before the pandemic, certainly during the pandemic, and after the pandemic is going to be so critical. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gislene to talk a little bit more about the community learning hubs that NLC has been promoting with communities across the country. Gislene.
Thanks, Bella. How's everyone doing? I know it's been a packed conference. So it's about noon here in eastern part of the US, and I believe it's evening where you are right now. So we're probably the only thing stopping you between you and a beautiful glass of wine right now. So in case you've already grabbed for that wine, buen provecho. But so while we're digging into today's discussion, I think it's important to note that the conference so far has been incredible. I do not speak Catalán, pero me migré a los Estados Unidos de Lima, Peru, hace como 22 años. And with the Spanish that I still know, I was able to listen in on a couple of discussions and was reminded of two things. One, that we are so interconnected now more than ever before. And two, boy, can I not wait to travel so I can potentially meet all of you in person, especially if I get an education passport one day. Please add me to that list. But in all seriousness, with everything that we have seen occur over the last year, these discussions that you've had over the last couple of days could not come at a better time. Right now, we are in the midst of a global revolution, one that necessitates greater creativity, but not necessarily originality. We've heard it said before because it's something so natural about who we are as humans. The need and want to improve is there to continuously revolutionize the world around us. Over the last year, I've heard 3 terms used to really define what is needed to move us past this moment. We've heard rebuild, redesign, reimagine. While these are all possible ways of framing our vision, we have to give ourselves more credit. We've already imagined it, we've designed it, and to rebuild it would mean to put together the pieces to something that is clearly broken. So if you're anything like me, I like to spend my weekends watching home renovation videos. The thing that I love about home renovations is that we can accept the fact that some homes are broken. Some homes have been lived in, people made themselves comfortable in them, they built stories and memories, people designed them to fit into their lifestyles, and they clearly show their age and their time. But when someone else moves in, that person may have a different style, a different taste, and different needs. They're defined by a different time, and therefore they make adjustments to the home to reflect those changes. But this also does not mean that the home does not have good bones. So what does that say about us? You may be looking at me and wondering, what does this have to do with education? So as you heard over the last couple of days, education is defined by our local communities, the places we call home. And education, at least up until this point, has been used as a tool for global competition. To get real about the kind of home that we want to create here on Earth, we have to get real about who we were before the pandemic. So a couple of things that I want to highlight for us to think about is that in the late 18th century, before the pandemic, we were working 10 to 16-hour workdays. And these were normal for many people because of the fact that we were told that factories needed to be open 24/7. When it became clear that such long days were both brutal and unsustainable, people advocated for shorter workdays. But change did not come until 1914, where workdays were cut to 8 hours. However, in many cases, we now say we work 8 hours, but in reality, Americans work an average of 11 hours per day. And in some cases, due to the blurred lines of COVID, many more, with only about 2.5 hours of productivity. And something that does not faze me is that at this same time, when we were entering the Industrial Revolution, was also the creation of our education system. Some would say that our school today continues to reflect the needs of the Industrial Revolution, linear and repetitive. So this begs the question, are we working for productivity or working to innovate? The other thing we have to think about is that in 2019, it was estimated that the average American spent close to 11 hours behind the wheel. That's 11 hours per week spent driving to work, school, and leisure. For some students in the United States who do not have access to good schools in their neighborhood, this sometimes meant waking up 3 hours before the school bell rang and taking 2 to 3 buses. But how much time we spend behind the wheel also tells us about our contributions to climate change, which vehicles emit more than 1.7 billion tons of greenhouse gases per year. But with so much time spent behind the wheel and at work and at school, you have to wonder how much time is spent connecting to nature and the natural elements around us. Realistically, before the pandemic, really not much time. For some communities, exploring the outdoors is not accessible. As Bella talked a little bit about, the high density urban areas may not have public parks or greenery. Industrial plants may impact air quality and health. And the climate change may have already impacted some communities and made connections to nature virtually inaccessible. So there's a saying that goes, how we spend our days is of course how we spend our lives. While technologies helps us connect in a whole new way, like the way we are doing right now, I'm zooming into Spain and you're getting to hear, I'm getting to connect with you in this way. Before the pandemic, we lived very hectic lives, constantly on the go, hustling and bustling through our communities, taking for granted some of the most important elements of our humanity, and that was connection. So what would it look like to renew our commitment to ourselves and our communities, one that places the learner at the center, feeding the things that are true about who we are as humans, not only for youth, but also adults, feeding our natural curiosities to be true explorers of our universe? While the Community Learning Hub model has emerged as a result of the pandemic, which we'll discuss later in our presentation, there have been many years of studies that document the need for holistic supports and services. As I mentioned earlier in the conversation, our revolution doesn't necessarily need originality, but rather some creativity. So now I want to toss it back to my colleague, Bella. who's been doing a lot of work in this space too. Bela, what has it looked like to build communities that put learners at the center, and how has it improved educational equity?
Thanks, Gislene. Absolutely. So this has been a evolution, in the United States. We have tried many different things. The community school model is a model that's been around for some time, but it's gaining speed and gaining momentum and gaining understanding and investment. So the community school model, as Gislene said, puts students at the center. We're looking for our children to be successful, but we know that they need so much more around them to help them be that way. There are so many barriers to learning, right? And so here's just kind of a model that shows we want to put the relationships around them. There's a lot of training of community school teachers and coordinators and the principal too, to make sure that young people feel known, they feel heard, and they feel loved. And then bringing all the partners in a community together to really think about mental health, medical, dental health. There are so many basic things like asthma and vision that just get in the way of students learning because nobody knows that they need glasses. So thinking about bringing in a medical clinic in a school building to be able to provide those services to the students and also to their families who may not have access to insurance, may not have access to a hospital or doctor's office. So really removing some of those barriers, and then also being able to have conversations with families around their housing, around employment, thinking through those transportation challenges. And so kind of wrapping around all of those intervention and treatment services to help students. And then one big element of community schools as well is the citizen participation, community engagement. Trying to really bring in the community to understand what that community needs. So this is just a graphic from a research report done by the Learning Policy Institute that did an amazing research study summarizing over 140 different research studies about community schools and the elements that community schools provide. So you see here the 4 pillars. In the green is the expanded and enriched learning time and opportunities. So that's your after school, your summer, your opportunities to connect with nature, to do hands-on learning, real-world problem solving. You have the purple at the bottom, the integrated student supports, and that gets to providing food, providing basic needs, the medical and dental, other types of supports that they need. And then the orange at the top, this collaborative leadership practices is really about bringing the leaders together in the school community to work together, to think about what can they all do together to help meet that student's need. So this is where the principal of a school is the principal, but they're working in partnership with the community school coordinator and a site team of parents and other community members to talk about what that community looks like and what that community needs. This is a very different model than I think a lot of principals are used to, and so this doesn't work for all schools, but really thinking about how the principal can share that leadership and really elevate the community school coordinator role to be a partner with the principal, that everyone's leaning in to trying to support the students and to get those student outcomes. And then the blue at the bottom is around that active and family community engagement, really thinking about how to bring families in. There are so much knowledge and resources and skill that parents have in a community, even if they don't speak the language. So we have so many Latino communities or immigrant communities from Africa and others that maybe are not great English speakers, but think about all that they know and all the things that they can share with the students. So giving them a role to participate in the school and share their knowledge, their expertise with the students. It also helps them feel a part of the community and helps them want to be active and support the school. So community schools have seen, lots of results over time. Here's just a picture of sort of the short-term, long-term results and kind of the end impact that we're trying to achieve with the community school model, right? You want to make sure kids are ready. You want to make sure families are involved, as I said. And this leads to academic success. It leads to students being more healthy. It leads them to communities to being better places to live. Whole communities have been transformed when community members and young people feel an ownership and feel a connection and feel a belonging, to their school. So it's very exciting. I mean, even in the US, in our Congress, in our federal government, there, you may have heard, I don't know how news gets across the oceans, but a big new legislative plan with billions of dollars behind it finally passed by Congress, and President Biden should be signing it today, tomorrow, to put a lot of new money in for after school and for summer and for community schools. And it's because of the advocacy and because of the evidence that shows the kind of impact that community schools and after school can have. So there are a lot of words on this slide, and I hope these slides will be made available to you afterwards. But this was just from that research study that really shows that community schools can meet the needs of low-income students and low-achieving students by helping to close that opportunity and achievement gap. That the integrated student supports, those medical and dental services, that they help to improve attendance, behavior, social functioning, and achievement. And that the after school and summer learning, they're also associated with positive academic outcomes, with school attendance also going up, with their behavior going up, and their coursework and grades going up as well. And that community engagement is also associated with reduced absenteeism and increased academic outcomes. We know so much, there's been a lot of research on attendance, and that attendance matters. It seems very basic, common sense. Of course, when kids come to school, they learn more, but it's really important with the absenteeism is really contributing to a lot of academic decline. So just in terms of challenges, the challenges in this work is that it's so important that the school leader embraces the community. And that's, like I said, that's not always common. Some of the challenges are finding the money to be able to fund a person, a coordinator that is managing the community school partnership, somebody that can help reach out to the community and find out what services and supports to bring into the school. Again, like I said, it's important for teachers and principals to share that leadership. You hear so many times about teachers who, sometimes really feel that, the after school providers who are coming into their classrooms, are not, respecting their classroom and keeping their classroom in order. And so it's important for that communication to be open when people are sharing the building and sharing the spaces. Again, really thinking about community needs and getting that data to understand what the community wants. Every community school looks different, just like every after school and summer program looks different, because you want to make sure you're meeting what the young people want, what's going to make them come and stay and participate and be engaged in the program. And so getting that data. Also really making sure that you are giving those disenfranchised communities a voice. There are so many people in our communities that don't trust the schools, right? They maybe didn't have a good experience in their own life with schools, or they maybe themselves didn't go to school that much, in their home country. And so it's important to find a way to help them share their concerns and their thoughts and their needs. Another challenge can be looking for physical space in a school building for those community partners to come and provide those services. Not all schools have additional space for those kinds of things, so sometimes that can be a challenge too. And then, of course, even just finding out who those partners are that you can bring to the table. So as I said, this has been a movement that's growing, and the National League of Cities, we partner with the Coalition for Community Schools, another organization here in the US. And the goal is to grow community schools to 25,000 community schools by 2025. We've done a count, and there's about 10,000 community schools in the US right now. And so we're really trying to push by supporting different networks of schools and leaders and superintendents and principals and mayors. NLC is also involved at the table to try to explain to mayors how they can play a role in expanding community schools. And like I said, the new federal money that may be coming will also help this as well. So I will turn this over to Gislene. Should I stop sharing again? Yes.
Yeah, wow, Bella, you mentioned a lot there. And one of the things you mentioned was, like, to build community schools that we need to really start with community. So though the pandemic's true tolls right now, we don't quite have the data yet on what the impact of the pandemic has been on education, not only in the United States, but globally. We know that schools across the world are grappling with various challenges, but they shouldn't and aren't facing these alone. Currently, early forecasts from around the world show that some students are returning to school with close to an entire year behind, academically, socially, emotionally, and developmental needs. Students of color, students with disabilities, and students from low-income families will likely bear the brunt of all these losses. In fact, some of the early data suggests that it's already happening for many of our students. All of this threatens to widen the inequality gap and hobble recovery. However, our education systems' underlying problems long predate the coronavirus. So despite the invaluable and heroic work of our educators, not only in the US, but across the globe, schools are no longer sufficient for addressing the complex needs of today's learners, a fact that COVID-19 has made plain and simple. So while it was developed during a different industrial era, today's education system was never designed to meet modern learners' needs, to renew our commitment, not only to ourselves, but to our communities. It looks like what Bella just showed us, the community school model, one that is equipped to expand opportunities, meet learners' interests and needs, and offer diverse paths to success. And let me see if I can share my screen. Building back better will require investments not only in schools, but in community-wide learning hubs or ecosystems that can leverage supports and collective efforts of classrooms, science centers, libraries, museums, parks, after-school programs, maker spaces, and so much more that our communities have access to, with components that are both public and private, virtual and natural. Learning ecosystems should reflect the needs of today and connect the way that we are connected and interdependent society. The partnerships that are forged within them can spark and spread high impact innovation, support collaboration among formal and informal spaces, and educators provide opportunities for young people to solve real world problems with hands-on activities and build more equitable and resilient communities. Nearly every community contains all these components of affecting learning ecosystems right now. I saw someone in the chat box post like that Catalonia is already doing a lot of these things, and you are on the right path. Because a lot of these things that we have already. And amid the pandemic, the community learning hubs have really been a way of supporting students and connecting some of those students that Bella mentioned that might have not had technology in their home to technology in some of these spaces. I saw there's a couple of examples of places that made their libraries, remote learning locations that used the recreation centers to connect students to in-person learning activities. Other places like museums ended up becoming places where students got cohorted to connect with adults, not only as mentors but also supervisors, and to also get the continued social and emotional development. During a time of a global health pandemic, putting the priorities of public health front and center were obviously the point. We wanted to make sure that cohorting students was happening so that easy mitigation of any spread could happen as well. But now we see this as an opportunity to also think about what are the needs of learners? What is our continued pathway forward? So to bring this to life, I want to show you a couple of examples and ways that communities across the country are using these learning hub models and have been doing this even before COVID-19. And again, I do want to reiterate that a lot of these ecosystems and hubs are going to be built from the community and informed by community, as Bella mentioned. So they can really be fit to whatever the community's priorities will be. Like if your priority is to become a life sciences hub in your region, you can do that. If your community is a lot of farmers or agricultural industries, becoming an agricultural hub is something you can do. And so an example of this is Kansas City, Missouri. So the community vision, even before the pandemic, was to serve as a region's tech, entrepreneurship, innovation, and arts hub. And some of the largest industries that existed in Kansas, even before the pandemic, were health sciences and advanced manufacturing. So before the pandemic, they were really investing in making sure that students had access to STEM curriculum, not only in school, but also outside of school. One of the interesting things that they were doing is that they had high school seniors partner with entrepreneurs in these industries that I just mentioned to really solve real world problems, and like ectopemic pregnancies and salmonella poisoning. They really connected students to real life opportunities and experiences and made sure that their values were the things that we're addressing and helping them move forward throughout this time. During the pandemic, they really leaned into more of their community facilities to kind of expand where students could have access to these curriculums, working really front and center with their schools. As part of a lot of this work, and Bella talked about this too, like schools are going to be the central entity and community partner that cannot be left out of these conversations or equations. Another example is more of a statewide approach that's happening between 3 different states. So Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas has been working to develop a regional response that enables a community to respond to a climate smart decision-making by building Southern Plains climate hubs. So they, like everybody else across the world, is facing some of the catastrophic implications of climate change. And they want to be sure that they're preparing not only their industry leaders, but also their students to be able to respond to those kinds of changes and make sure that their students are leading in these conversations as well. So working in partnership with a couple of state and federal level partnerships, as well as community partners like the 4-H Club, they are developing new relationships to make sure their students have access to all of these learning opportunities. Amid the pandemic, they were able to also use some of those already existing relationships and places where they were connecting students outside of school to continue to provide students with those learning opportunities. In Eastern Kentucky, an ecosystem of school districts and universities and economic development organizations empower students to reimagine former coal land for entrepreneurship goals. So really, it goes back to the fact like a lot of this will be determined by what your community's priorities will be. And while schools have long been bastions of progress thanks to the work of educators, the current system's one-size-fits-all model was never designed to connect quickly and change world in which learners can now live. So tomorrow's graduates will have to tackle and think critically, work collaboratively, and tackle the intractable problems that COVID-19 has magnified. There's rampant inequality, intense political culture divides, and extreme ecological changes and pressures. And I know it's not one just that the US is facing. I know this is something that as a humanity, we're currently facing globally. So there's a couple of conditions just from our observations over the last couple of months of what's really important in thinking about these learning ecosystems, learning hubs, and what are needed to really kind of move this work forward. So when we think about this, one of the biggest things is really starting with youth voices and community engagement. Oftentimes, youth are kind of left out of the conversation. We think of them as the people that we're serving, but not necessarily the people that we need to be talking to. And we need to make, as we move forward into this collective impact work or collective action work, youth must be front and center at the table and in the conversations. It's also going to be really important to host conversations with community partners, community members. What is it that they want to see in their own communities? These people not only are residents or taxpayers, they are also people that live there and want to make a home for themselves there. And a lot of the efforts that you end up moving forward will be sustained by the voices of the people you build. So if you want to be able to continue to do this even after some municipal leadership, you need to have people at the foreground, really being able to advocate for the things that they want and they need. And the other biggest thing is about keeping these people at the center is like the proximity and partnership to the people who need the most services. Having them at the table will really help you define your vision for your community and where you want to move forward. So Bella talked a little bit about some of the partnerships that are necessary to kind of build out this learning ecosystem. And this will really be dependent on what you're prioritizing in your community. First, like I mentioned, some communities are really big on agriculture, so they're going to be prioritizing some of those partners. Here in my own town, we're really prioritizing some of our biomedical partners. We want to become a biomedical region. So we're going to be partnering with some large industry leaders in that space. But partnerships are going to be critical and key. And two of the ones that I'm going to say are really critical in having in the conversation are schools and your municipal leaders. Your municipal leaders are going to be your biggest allies because they can help galvanize and do so much more, as Bella mentioned, of the 10 carats of municipal leadership that are critical for these conversations. Another really key piece is going to be data and assessment. If you have data on where some of those gaps are right now, it's going to be really important to help you inform your conversation. if you have data on trends, where are some of the industries in your community going? That's also going to be important to informing where you kind of put some more of your investments. And it's going to be important to think about how you overlay data and inequity in your community, and also with the opportunities that you're bringing to your community. But just as equally as important as bringing data to the conversation is going to be thinking about the assessments. Bella talked about the importance of quality. Just as much as making the investments is important, assessing the quality of your program will be important. As humans, we want to continuously learn and develop, so should our programs. They should reflect the needs and ability to be able to do that and scale our work. We want to be able to increasingly improve. And if you don't have any data systems in place that can help you assess that, it's going to be difficult to kind of determine where you're going even after that. Another key part will be assessing your infrastructure. I talked a little bit about the time that we spent in transportation. And as Americans, we spend over 11 hours in our cars per week. So that says a lot about where we're going and where we're accessing some of the most important resources and services. I don't know if that's true for many communities in Catalonia, but when you think about these learning ecosystems, it's important to think about some of those transportation needs. What will students need to get to these places of services? What will you as an adult need to get to the places of services to serve your youth? Another thing that's also going to be important is thinking about buildings. We're in a time where building more is going to be harder. So thinking about how we can use buildings as multi-use as opposed to for only one purpose. There are some communities that think about using their schools as community centers in the evenings. Are there ways that you can use some of your schools and your museums to do the same? The other thing is thinking about some of the other infrastructure needs like broadband. How often did we think about broadband before the pandemic? I can be honest and say that's not something I really thought about before the pandemic. I knew I had the internet because it was on my phone or I was able to access it on my computer, but before the pandemic, it wasn't necessarily something I thought about being a big issue. And now we're seeing that having access to broadband is one of the most essential services. It is not a luxury, but a utility. So to be able to move into the 21st century economy, having access to broadband, not only the internet itself, but also technology in our homes will be so critical. So those are going to be some of the questions you might want to ask yourself about, like, what is the infrastructure that we currently have at our disposal to be able to use, and where are some of those gaps in opportunity? The other really key thing that we talked about is some of those wraparound services. There are a lot of things that are happening right now that are impacting us in many different ways. We talked about some of the mental health issues that we're facing, some of the economic challenges that we're facing. So what kind of services are our students and community members needing? Is our community really facing a drug problem? Do we need to bring in another number of partners who can address those different challenges? Is our community personally facing more issues when it comes to social and emotional development? Do we need to plug those in more often? We're considering those wraparound services and what your students need in your community will be essential in not only identifying the partners, but also identifying your vision. And the last thing I want to say is that this is not an education reform. This is more of a renewal of what is already true about us as people, as our communities. Like I said, a lot of these things that you're seeing here are already exist in our community. We just have to think about how we're using them more intentionally and authentically. So I'll turn it back to you, Bella.
Thanks so much, Gislene. It's been amazing to see the work that communities have done across the country, and such a recognition of, people who need the most right now. So I'm going to wrap up so we have time for questions, but just in terms of a call to action, the municipal leaders and all of your partners who are on the phone, it's your opportunity to really just lift up your voice to talk about this goal, this vision of educational equity, vocalize it, and bring people on board with you. Bring your educators together and your community providers. We've talked a lot about that, to review the data on what your community needs and where you're seeing those gaps and where those inequities are. If you're thinking about after school or the community school model, if you have resources, prioritize bringing those people together to create an after-school system, and it will take some investment. And oftentimes the city can put that money forward. Bring your community foundations, your other philanthropic organizations to come together with you. Again, that data mapping piece with GIS map that I talked about is going to be so helpful. And when you're thinking about your schools and your programs, you want to make sure that your school district is hiring people who are very community-minded, because of all of these pieces are so important. Focus groups, surveys, anything you can do to bring in more information to find out what your community needs. And then as you're building schools or building community facilities, you want to think about how you can build them with extra space to be able to allow that multi-use, that joint use that Gislene was talking about, to be able to create memorandums and flexible joint use agreements. And then in terms of building champions, reach out to some of those folks that are not typically the ones who may speak out for educational equity. So it could be a sports star, it could be celebrity, it could be a business community person, but think about who's going to listen to them, or who is someone that people will listen to, and get them on board to buy into this educational equity, because you know how much of an impact it has on the future of your community and your region. So with that, I think we'll move to questions. Ismael, take it away. So many questions in the chat, but we can't read them. Yo hablo español también, tengo que decirlo, porque Gislene lo dice bastante. Yo hablo español también, pero no hablo catalán, pero mucho gusto.
Sí, no us he dit, però tant la Bela com la Gislene parlen un castellà excel·lent i, per tant, en realitat ens podríem comunicar amb elles directament en les preguntes traduïdes. Però aprofitaré el rol de moderador, perquè com que hi ha moltes preguntes que ens han arribat per un costat i per un altre, moltes paraules d'agraïment també i de felicitació per la iniciativa que porten i pel que ens han explicat, però intentaré agrupar les preguntes en diverses rondes per no fer-les d'un amunt i allargar-nos més del compte. Hi ha una pregunta que diu com diferents ajuntaments han treballat per validar la qualitat de les activitats, de la diversitat d'activitats educatives de la comunitat. La diversitat de la comunitat és una riquesa, però també comporta a vegades desigualtats o una heterogeneïtat molt gran de qualitats. Com ajuden a millorar també aquests ajuntaments o enriquir la qualitat educativa d'aquestes activitats? Aquesta és una pregunta. Una altra pregunta també diu com diferents municipis treballen aquests sistemes de dades municipals de les activitats, amb quins sistemes es treballen aquestes dades, són dades orientades a que les famílies i els mestres sàpiguen on està el mapa i les condicions d'accessibilitat i els preus fàcilment, o són dades de cara al monitoratge de com els nois hi participen, si ens poden explicar alguna cosa més sobre aquestes dades. I després, la tercera pregunta d'aquest primer bloc és com han aconseguit diferents municipis vincular els centres educatius a la xarxa comunitària. És a dir, moltes vegades en el nostre país hi ha centres que treballen més de portes endins i que els hi costa més fer que els docents i els tutors mirin la trajectòria de l'infant al llarg de tota la setmana. És a dir, com fer que el centre s'impliqui en la comunitat i com fer que el tutor de cada alumne també actuï com un prescriptor, com un recomanador d'activitats o itineraris comunitaris.
Thank you so much. Great questions. So I'll take some of the first couple ones. Maybe I'll speak to the data system one first. So yes, data systems mean many different things, right? So in terms of the location and the prices, yes, many communities have created what we call program locators. And so it's an online tool that brings all the information about where the programs are, the prices, the activities they offer. And parents are able to enter their zip code to be able to determine, I want to find a program within half a mile or 1 mile of my house, what's available. So that's been an opportunity that cities have used, and many cities themselves, the municipality themselves, have hosted that program locator on their city website. And it was a whole process where they had to issue a survey to get all of the community organizations to give that data so they could put it into an online program locator. So that's more for locating and understanding what diversity of opportunities exist. But the other piece of the data system is really looking at outcomes and impact. And that's the data that you really need to be able to continue to make your case and advocate for more money and more partnerships, right? And so many different software systems that provide this opportunity. And some communities have built their own. So it's really important to ask yourself as a community the questions: what data do you want? What do you want to know? Do you want to know about school grades? Do you want to know about attendance? Do you want to know about behavior? Do you want to know about crime? Right? How have these programs impacted these community-wide outcomes? And how have they impacted the student success themselves? And so as a community of providers, people have to agree to collect that data and to give that data to the data system. They need to be entering that data themselves, or having somebody designated to do that. And there's all the questions about privacy and confidentiality, making sure that student data is kept private. But many different examples of different data systems that communities have used. Like I said, some are just you can buy, and then you can work with the software developer to tailor it, and then some that communities are building themselves. In terms of enriching quality, maybe Gislene, I'll turn that one to you, since you were a provider once too.
I will say that a lot of the questions that you were asking really get back to this idea that being informed by the community is so essential when it comes to how we design or define our vision. Having those people front and center in the conversation are so critical, because again, they help capture the needs of the current time, and also these are the people that build our communities for our lifetime. And they help really inform our mayors and council members. At the end of the day, they're residents, they're our neighbors, they're our friends. So they're living in the same way that we are. So they should have the same investments that we do in our communities. But really plugging in these voices helps build a movement, not a moment. And what I mean by that is like having all of these collective voices in the conversations helps us define our vision forward in a way that nobody else can change it, because it's the people speaking for themselves. We've seen a number of examples, and especially during this time of learning loss that's happening globally, a number of students have become disconnected from schools. And one of the most important things that a number of community leaders is bringing those students into the conversation. What do you need to continue to grow and develop? What can we do to support you? And having those intentional relationships with students and community are going to be so important. And also when we think about quality, when we think about improvement, Bella talked a little bit about the data systems that are important, but that's why your community partners are so important as well, because they may be collecting data in so many other different ways and may have the capacity to do so that you don't have the capacity to do. Maybe you're a staff of 5 people, but maybe your colleague or your partners have a staff of over 25. Maybe they have the capacity to identify more data entries and points. So really leaning into your partners is going to be the pinnacle point of how you inform the conversation. I believe, did you want me to turn it back to you, Bella? You had a couple other responses. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just to further on the quality piece. So in America, we have the National After School Association, and they really have developed standards, quality standards for programs. And in fact, every city sometimes created their own in the early days, but now many are kind of taking the sort of national standard. And in the standards for after school programs, it really lays out, ratio for students, for kids, how you engage youth voice, the diversity of activities and programs, what the physical space should look like. So we have kind of a list of those standards that programs should adhere to be kind of listed as a quality program. And so that would be something that, if you don't have that in Spain, happy to share that with you, and you can build it to make sense for your community. But that's definitely one of the key pieces, is making sure that providers agree that we are all going to work to this quality to be part of that. So that was just one piece I wanted to say. And then to be honest, your last question is really good and really difficult. The linking educators, the centers to the community network and the teachers, there needs to be so much work. Sorry, I have this background noise that I can't get rid of. So much work to help teachers connect with their community partners. In a community school, that happens much more easily, right? Because you have the community partners in the school, and the whole purpose of that site-based leadership team is for teachers to learn about what are the kids doing in the after school program and what challenges may they have and how can teachers support that and vice versa. But in a regular school setting, when you have after school over here and schools over here, there's not a lot of communication between teachers and those after school providers. So I think even in the US, we have to do a lot more work in that area. But creating opportunities, and you guys could be the innovators and ones that we learn from on this, but creating opportunities for in-school educators to be able to hear from those community providers if they're not in your school, to be able to facilitate that back and forth and really holistically support the child would be fantastic. Anything, Gislene, on that? I know we're at time. Ismael, you tell us when we have to stop talking.
I think we have 15 minutes for questions.
Moltes gràcies. Moltes gràcies per les respostes, Bela i Gislene. Si us sembla bé, ens allarguem uns minuts en relació al temps que teníem previst, uns pocs minuts, per demanar-vos una altra ronda i encabir unes altres preguntes que també són molt interessants. Diu, amb quins models ens podeu explicar que diferents municipis aporten beques i ajudes econòmiques a les activitats extraescolars? És a dir, són ajudes directament a les activitats, són ajudes a l'alumne, són ajudes activitat per activitat, són bosses d'hora per participar, es canalitzen a través de l'escola, directament a través del municipi, a través de la... Quins models per a vosaltres són interessants o destacaríeu de provisió de beques i ajudes econòmiques en aquest àmbit? Una altra pregunta té a veure amb la Pilar Lleonard de l'Associació Internacional de Ciutats Educadores. Ens pregunta quin perfil ha de tenir el connector d'aquest ecosistema d'aprenentatge, per aquella persona que enllaça gens, els dinamitza, que acompanya projectes, no? És a dir, d'aquí depèn on podria estar associat. Hi ha diverses preguntes que van en aquesta mateixa direcció. Quina institució, pregunta l'Anna Baró, pot aportar el dinamitzador comunitari, el que fa els vincles? I després la Cristina Bucar ens pregunta amb quins indicadors, quins són els indicadors per vosaltres més interessants amb els que seguir, monitoritzar i avaluar aquests ecosistemes d'aprenentatge, aquestes escoles de comunitat. Diguem, quins són aquells indicadors que ens poden parlar més potser de qualitat, connectivitat, diversitat i millora dels aprenentatges. I per acabar, també la Cristina Bucar diu com aconseguim que els agents treballin junts? És a dir, a Catalunya hi ha moltes xarxes, per exemple, que promouen projectes, hi ha molt d'esperit impulsor, molta iniciativa en aquest sentit, però a vegades costa crear un marc comú perquè aquestes iniciatives treballin en la mateixa direcció, s'integrin bé. No sé si ens podíeu explicar com algunes ciutats han promogut això o han resolt bé aquest repte.
Fabulous. Wonderful, wonderful questions. We could talk for hours and hours. So I'll start, Gislene, if that's okay. So on the models of scholarships, I guess I would say that I don't think of them as scholarships as much, though maybe there are some places that have scholarships. I think of it more as investments that cities are making in the programs so that the programs can be free or low cost. So there are some programs that, or there's some communities that are giving, I guess I'm not as familiar with places that are giving like scholarships to students, but certainly there are many cities that are investing in after-school programs where the city will give money to the community-based organization. We have the YMCA and Boys and Girls Club. Those are like the big organizations that do a lot of after-school programs, but there's many small ones as well. And then even within the city government, they have, through their park and recreation departments, they have a lot of after-school programs, public programs. And so those are more where, it makes it low cost or free, or what they call a sliding scale. So depending upon your family income, you pay less to be able to participate. And so you wanted some models. So in Nashville, Tennessee, they have they call NAZA, N-A-Z-A, the Nashville After Zone Alliance. And in Providence, Rhode Island, they have the Providence After School Alliance. And these are citywide networks, citywide systems that have really brought together programs to be able to deliver the programs to the schools or at a community site to be able to deliver programs, and they're no cost to students. You have eligibility based on income, so these programs are typically serving the most low-income students and the students most in need. So I hope that helps. So many cities are doing that. Los Angeles, they have a big program coming out of the Los Angeles mayor's office in California, and all of those programs are free. They serve 25,000 students across the city of Los Angeles. They receive money. Most of the after-school programs, I should say, in America have funding from different places, and they put it all together, right? So they're getting money from the federal government. We have over $1 billion. This is before the new money that just is going to come today, but over $1 billion in grants that come from the federal government to the states, and then local programs apply to their state education department to get money for after-school programs. And then you also have city investment, and then you can also get foundation money from private philanthropic dollars. So there's a mix, and many of those programs are really targeted on low-income students and on this question of equity, and so they try to offer the programs for free. I hope that helps. And in terms of questions around a profile, like what institution can be the community driver, I think that's a perfect question for today. We work at the National League of Cities, and so we have to say cities are a critical driver of this work because of everything that we've talked about, right? Because you can make the case that community learning hubs, community schools, after school, summer programs, all of the enrichment, that all of these opportunities help enhance the quality of life of your students, families, and residents, and that they have a stake in the game, right? City council members, mayors, they have a stake in the game. They need their cities to continue to be vital and successful. And so by doing that, of course, you need to have that sort of three-legged stool of city, school district, and community partners. And of course, because everything takes money, it's really important to have your business community and your private philanthropic community at the table as well. And again, from our perspective, mayors, city council members have that power to convene, that convening authority to bring everybody to the table to say, this is important, our city needs it, we are falling behind, we need to bring everyone together to ensure the success of our students, because they're going to be in our workforce in 5-10 years, and that time goes by so fast. So I think that can be a huge institution, the city, to be a community driver for this work. Indicators, community learning hubs. Gislene, I give you the hard one.
No, and I just wanted to build off of that, Bella. You made a great point that it really is municipal leaders that have the critical role in doing this. They have the bird's eye view of what are the needs and resources that are accessible in their cities. But they're also not the end all be all answer to these questions. It's going to be important that they are informed by, like I said, community members. And so I'm going to share a couple of the examples that we've seen emerge throughout the pandemic, in addition to the ones I shared that are really front and center for me personally, as I think about where this model was used during the pandemic and how it can be used even post-pandemic. So as many of you may have seen during the coronavirus, the United States faced some racial tensions. In particular, there's one city who faced a lot of those, and that's the city of St. Louis, Missouri. They're rewriting their story now and telling us what they want to see in their communities happen. We saw what happened there this past summer in 2020, but they want to tell a different story and how they move us forward. And one of the critical things that they're doing is making sure that the city partnerships that they build throughout the pandemic are continuous even post-pandemic. So one of the things that they did, they stood up community learning hubs, various centers around the community to really address the needs of students during the pandemic, because a lot of these places were shut down as a result of the pandemic and public health reasons, but they were able to figure out a way of using them in smaller cohorts to make sure that their students had access to all those different pieces we talked about: digital access, supervisors, youth and young adult mentors. But now they're thinking about how do we dig into this, the fact that we were able to stand up these facilities and centers in a new way that can support our schools and their learning day itself. So they're thinking about how do we bring civic engagement into these different facilities. So a lot of the students are working in partnership with their school district and these community providers to think about civic engagement and how students can address social inequalities and racial tensions with after-school curriculums. Another city that's been doing a lot of work on community learning hubs is the city of San Francisco. You may know them as a big hub on innovation and tech. When we think about Silicon Valley, you probably think about San Francisco. The mayor there has been an incredible asset in thinking about how do we redefine the learning day itself, not only supporting students during the pandemic, but now that we've seen that this is possible, to make sure that students have access to resources inside and outside of school. What other ways can we tailor these resources? In both cases, the mayors have played an integral part and role in defining the vision, again, in partnership with community partners. The other thing I do want to talk about is the fact that if this is something that is what we want to use to define our history, our story, it is something that we can push forward. In the United States alone, because of the various community schools and community learning hubs that have stood up during the pandemic, there is now a federal reconsideration for how we do the learning day. A lot of folks are coming together from both the national and the local level to think about how does the learning day happen in a natural way, connecting students to both like this kind of learning, but also natural learning that's happening outdoors. So again, it's not a moment, it's more of a movement, and it really takes a little bit of time to think about what that vision looks like. In terms of indicators, those I think are, again, goes back to how we define the vision for our community. I don't think we have all the clear answers at this point about what that looks like, but it's very much defined locally, but depending on what our priorities are.
Yeah, thanks, Gislene. I mean, I would say for indicators right now, like Gislene said, it's early, but at least reconnection to school, right? I mean, in America, we're not open. Our schools are not open. Most of the cities, schools are not open, or they're open hybrid, a couple of days a week, or 1 week on, 1 week off. And so at least the community learning hubs are able to see how many students have accessed services, right? Have logged on to school. So I think they're tracking that. Just to reinforce Gislene's point about San Francisco, one thing that stood out to me about them is they have a lot of rich people in San Francisco, but they have a community of immigrants and people, who are not well off. They've put $26 million in these community learning hubs to support 300 kids. Like 300 kids is a pretty small number for the amount of money that they're putting in. And they're telling their wealthy residents that they can't use the library because the kids are in the library. And there's a lot of pushback, you can imagine. I just think it's a very interesting story. There's a lot of pushback, like we pay taxes, we own these libraries, we should be able to come in. And the mayor and the city agency directors are saying, no, our kids need this more. And so this is a real interesting story about how to prioritize kids, and a very clear example of prioritizing equity, right? Not equality. In terms of your question about common frameworks, I think the framework is essential. To do any of this work, that's exactly what you need. You need to have a clear vision and a framework around why are we bringing partners in and what role can each partner play. So I know I've talked about Providence and Nashville, but also Grand Rapids, Michigan is a city that we've worked with for many, many years. And to really have a framework around after school, as well as how to partner with the schools, and as well as thinking about post-secondary and like kind of that whole education continuum. In Denver, Colorado, they've also been very thoughtful and intentional about what after school looks like. And one piece we didn't get into that much, but is critical, is the social and emotional learning, the social and emotional health, well-being of students. And there's interesting work happening in Denver and Tacoma, Washington, and other places in Boston around, Boston is a great example of after school too, of teachers and after school providers intentionally working together to improve the social and emotional learning of young people, improving that school climate. Learning from after school providers are youth development people, right? And they're trained to learn how to work with young people. School educators are not necessarily trained in that way. And so bringing those two together, holding intentional conversations and training and professional development opportunities so that those two can talk. It's been a really big piece of some new work funded by the Wallace Foundation in the US as well. So I don't know what opportunities we have afterwards to be able to share documents with with the group to share with you all around frameworks, but I think making sure that the vision is clear and sort of what are your outcomes and kind of moving backwards from what is the end goal that you want to see and what are the inputs that you're going to need to reach that goal, and who in the community can take responsibility for some of those inputs, to really develop that framework is going to be a tool and your map, right, to help you get there.
Molt bé. Moltíssimes gràcies per la densitat i la qualitat d'aportacions. Jo no em resisteixo, hi ha moltes preguntes que queden fora, però no em resisteixo a una darrera pregunta que encara que la respongueu d'una forma molt breu, que és molt important al nostre país. El nostre sistema educatiu té qualitat. La veritat és que tenim moltes activitats, una riquesa enorme d'activitats extraescolars, no un ecosistema, com estem parlant encara, prou connectat, però el que és veritat és que el gran problema educatiu al nostre país és un 20% d'abandonament escolar prematur, de school dropout, que es diu als Estats Units. Un de cada 5 joves no continua estudiant i abandona l'escola. I això segurament és el que converteix en molt important una de les preguntes que diu i amb els instituts, a l'edat de 12-16 anys, com funcionen aquest tipus de programes? És a dir, contemplen els alumnes de secundària? Amb quines edats? Com es pot treballar? Quines ciutats han aconseguit models interessants per treballar amb aquestes edats més de transició i on hi ha risc d'abandonament escolar prematur?
I can start talking about that, Bella, for a little. And I think one of the things that we've seen is when we talk about the partners that come to the conversation is the industry leaders that kind of reflect the community needs, but also career and technical education have become a central point of these community learning hubs and the community school model. When we think about what the needs of students will be in the future, it's something that has been central in the conversation, especially as you have seen or you may have seen what the United States economy has been doing during the pandemic. The closing down of so many businesses and small mom and pop shops has really impacted us and our communities. So there's a need to really think about how we're making those connecting points. And in a lot of these learning hubs and community schools, it is a front and center conversation. How do we bring these industry leaders and their curriculums into these facilities? And as I pointed out in the Kansas City, Missouri example, they are making sure that these facilities are equipped to prepare their students for those industries, that the students can feel like they are getting connected not only to school, but to future workforce opportunities. And one of the things that we've been working on is kind of identifying some of the needs of students who have become disconnected or are becoming disengaged during the pandemic or dropping out. Many of the students in the United States who are no longer attending school are within the ages of 16 to 18 as a result of the pandemic and have lost touch. So why are they no longer going to school has been a central question for us. And many of the answers is because we don't see additional opportunities beyond high school at this point. And I'm sure that that's something that we may share as a commonality globally. For a lot of students right now, they may feel isolated or lost about their career pathways and what is to come even post high school. So that's one of the ways that folks are trying to reconnect and re-engage students, giving them those hands-on project-based learning opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll just add quick, it's a very important age group that the US is very concerned about for the exact reasons you were talking about in terms of potential for dropout and being able to earn income, right? They're dropping out because they need to work and they often need to support their families. And so creating opportunities for apprenticeships or internships, being able to connect them with an employer so that they're gaining some course credit and also some money and those skills. And again, that social capital to connect with employers has been really important. And also many cities in America support what they call summer youth employment programs. And cities are making significant investments in these programs are from usually 14, as low as maybe 14, not 12, but 14 to 18-year-old, where it's maybe a 6-week or 8-week program. Again, this was impacted during the pandemic for sure, but there were still many communities that found a virtual way to connect kids to employers and paid them. So they're getting paid a stipend, and they're getting exposure to different work opportunities and careers to be able to think about how to take their next step. So, I think the employment and the income is a really critical hook for this age group, because that is one of the major incentives for disengagement and dropping out. There are many other reasons, of course, health-wise, and drugs and gangs and all of these other things happening in our communities. But I think oftentimes some of those things are happening also as a result of needing income and needing to feel a part of something. And so the thinking about apprenticeships and internships and employment and working with your business community to keep them engaged is a really good strategy.
Moltíssimes gràcies, de veritat, a les dues, per la vostra feina, per la generositat de compartir aquest diàleg tan compromès, i esperem no trigar gaire a tenir-vos a Barcelona, potser a fer un taller més relaxat i discutir, que ens ensenyeu els coms i també poder compartir moltes de les iniciatives que s'estan fent a molts municipis de Catalunya. Gràcies de tot cor i continuem. A banda de que us demanarem algunes de les referències. Com que anem malament de temps, us presento al final d'aquestes jornades. Les tancarà la Fatija Benjamú. La Fatija és directora de l'Aliança Educació 360 i parlarà en nom de tots els que, de moviments de renovació pedagògica, de la Fundació Bofill, de totes les centenars d'entitats i de municipis que estem treballant en això. Ens parlarà de què hem assolit aquest any passat, el 2020, i quins són els reptes de l'any vinent. Gislene, Bela, moltíssimes gràcies i aprofito també per donar per extensió gràcies a totes les preguntes d'una qualitat enorme d'aquest debat.
Bona tarda, moltíssimes gràcies per totes les reflexions, totes les aportacions que ens heu fet, Bela, Gislene, Ismael. Ara cal sedimentar totes aquestes aportacions i veure en el nostre context com podem anar cap a un ecosistema educatiu més integral, més holístic, que respongui a les necessitats educatives. Com sabeu, ara és el moment de fer balanç del 2020 i de proposar-nos noves fites per aconseguir que tots els infants i adolescents puguin gaudir d'experiències d'aprenentatge reptadores tant dintre com fora de l'horari lectiu. Enguany, com sabeu, aquest balanç l'hem volgut fer de manera col·lectiva, copsant les vostres opinions, activitats i reptes. De fet, com us vam dir també a la inauguració, per fer-ho possible, us vam enviar una enquesta a la que vau respondre gairebé el 70% dels 310 socis actuals de l'Aliança. Quins titulars ens aporten les dades que hem recollit a través de l'enquesta? Aquesta enquesta que ha volgut, sobretot, fer visible aquesta resiliència col·lectiva que tenim com a aliança i quins són els reptes sobre els quals hi ha hagut més consens. Pel que fa als titulars que es trec de la gran quantitat d'activitats que hem desenvolupat, hi ha 3. D'una banda, la voluntat de que el confinament no esdevingués aïllament per a milers d'infants i famílies i que la pandèmia, per tant, no fos un parèntesis per l'educació. El 90% dels agents que heu respost a l'enquesta, ajuntaments, centres educatius i entitats, heu impulsat 1.100 activitats en perspectiva 360. I ho dèiem a la inauguració de les jornades. Amb la pandèmia hem descobert la nostra fragilitat, però lluny de paralitzar-nos, aquesta crisi ens ha activat per sostenir i garantir l'educació, especialment en els entorns més vulnerables. I val a dir que en la major part dels casos no ho hem fet sols, ho hem fet en aliança amb d'altres, amb organitzacions de naturalesa molt diversa, demostrant així que junts som més forts i més resilients. Tal com dèiem ahir, de fet. Segur que es podria haver fet més i millor, i això amb alguns de vosaltres ho hem parlat i en alguns casos ens heu fet arribar encara informació extra, però el que vull destacar és que davant d'una situació d'emergència i d'urgència educativa com l'actual, hem estès la mà i hem ofert més educació. Un segon titular a destacar. que tots els infants i adolescents es mereixen un estiu memorable. Entre tots hem contribuït a que l'opinió pública l'any passat i en l'estiu del 2020 descobreixi l'estiu com un espai d'oportunitats, però també com un espai de desigualtats educatives. Gràcies a la vostra acció, les activitats d'estiu van arribar a 55.000 infants i joves que han participat, com us deia, durant l'estiu del 2020, contribuint així amb aquestes activitats a la recuperació emocional, però també a la recuperació d'aprenentatges. I hem situat amb força aquest tema perquè no és només un tema vinculat a l'estiu del 2020, la pèrdua d'aprenentatges es dona estiu rere estiu. Ara tenim el repte de passar d'un estiu distret per a alguns infants a un estiu memorable, un estiu a recordar, en el que tots els nens i nenes i adolescents aprenguin i es diverteixin. Molts no tenen ni casa a la muntanya, i també sortia aquest matí a la taula que hem fet, ni tampoc tenen recursos per participar d'activitats enriquides. Però nosaltres tenim la responsabilitat, i sé que molts ajuntaments, moltes entitats i molts centres hi estan treballant de valent per fer-ho possible, tenim la responsabilitat que això canviï, de desplegar accions i polítiques que garanteixin un estiu de qualitat per a tothom. Una falca publicitària. Necessitarem del vostre compromís a partir del mes d'abril. Fem una campanya d'estiu enriquit i una crida al voltant d'aquest repte tan important. Dèiem que tenia tres titulars. El tercer titular que destaco és que hi ha hagut una aposta per crear vincle i acompanyar educativament. I per fer-ho hem desenvolupat especialment dos tipus d'activitats. Activitats que reforcin aprenentatges escolars i, per tant, m'estic referint a activitats de suport educatiu, a activitats de mentoria, de reforç, d'estudi assistit. I, de fet, perquè us feu una idea, la major part de les activitats, el 72% del total de les activitats que ens heu dit que heu fet durant l'any passat han estat d'aquesta categoria. Activitats per reforçar aprenentatges escolars i educatius. I, d'altra banda, també s'han desenvolupat activitats que alimenten el creixement personal i emocional. I amb això m'estic referint especialment a activitats de lleure, culturals i tecnològiques. La major part d'aquestes activitats s'han adreçat a infants i adolescents de l'educació obligatòria. Hi ha un tema que jo també crec que és important a destacar, que és que el primer trimestre del curs escolar 2020-2021 hi ha hagut un increment d'activitats adreçades a les famílies. I clarament, aquest era un repte que també anava apareixent l'any passat. L'objectiu principalment ha estat el de pujar el capital social d'aquestes famílies i empoderar-les i empoderar especialment les seves capacitats parentals i la seva implicació en l'educació dels fills i de les filles perquè els poguessin acompanyar amb més qualitat i amb més garantia. Us deia també que hi ha hagut tot un seguit de reptes que a partir de l'enquesta heu compartit amb nosaltres. D'aquests reptes hi ha 6 sobre els quals hi ha hagut molt de consens. I m'agradaria també poder compartir-les amb vosaltres. D'una banda, hi ha el repte de la promoció de l'equitat. I dir també que la major part d'aquests reptes ens interpel·len a nosaltres. Som un sector, som una aliança formada per agents molt crítics. I per això hem triat alguns reptes que no són gens fàcils, però que en tot cas sabem que són nuclears i que donen sentit a aquesta causa comuna que tenim, que és la de garantir oportunitats educatives tant dintre com fora del sistema educatiu i, a més, de manera connectada. Deia, el primer repte té a veure amb la promoció de l'equitat. Cal més inversió i més mesures per eliminar les desigualtats educatives en el fora escola. En aquest sentit, la connexió de l'educació formal i la connexió de l'educació no formal esdevé una palanca de canvi per millorar l'equitat educativa, per garantir la cohesió, la inclusió i per combatre la segregació. Aquest també ha estat un altre element que ens heu fet arribar de manera recurrent. L'altre repte ha estat la necessitat de continuar reivindicant amb fermesa que les activitats extraescolars i del lleure són una part ineludible del dret educatiu, perquè cada vegada més les oportunitats educatives es juguen en el fora escola. Això també ho hem vist durant aquests dies, ho vam veure ahir amb algunes de les intervencions i experiències que es van compartir, ho hem vist aquest matí i ho tornàvem a veure ara també amb la intervenció que ens han fet la Gislene i la Bela. Un tercer repte important que també ha sorgit és que calen més estructures i recursos per garantir la connexió dels agents comunitaris i dels entorns d'aprenentatge, lectius i no lectius, i per aprofitar especialment els actius comunitaris perquè tots els infants i joves puguin prosperar educativament. El treball col·laboratiu, com hem anat veient entre els diversos actors educatius, és imprescindible perquè l'educació surti enfortida d'aquesta crisi educativa. En un entorn canviant com el que tenim i complex, com el que ens ha tocat viure, però també com el que tindrem en els propers anys, necessitem de lideratges que cooperin entre ells, d'aliances público-privades que ens ajudin a recuperar la confiança en el futur i articular propostes amb visió compartida entre diversos sectors. Sectors com el cultural, com l'artístic, que també han fet una passa endavant, com sabem, i que també volen oferir les seves activitats per millorar el desenvolupament i el creixement educatiu de joves i d'infants. Les comunitats educatives han respost a l'emergència educativa i això també ho hem vist durant aquests 2 dies. Ara cal inversió, per tant, i cal una aposta ferma en clau de política educativa. Un altre repte interessant també que ha anat apareixent és la necessitat de més dispositius de suport educatiu i d'orientació i dispositius que estiguin articulats en el territori com a polítiques efectives per acompanyar el procés d'escolarització. Perquè ningú quedi enrere, i això ens ho explicava ahir també la Sarai Samper, perquè els infants i adolescents tinguin els suports i les orientacions que necessiten per construir les seves trajectòries educatives amb èxit. Un altre repte que evidentment havia d'aparèixer ha estat el de la necessitat de combatre la bretxa digital a través d'espais d'acompanyament i de formació a famílies i infants i des d'una perspectiva comunitària. El tema digital no és un luxe i això ho hem anat veient de manera clara i contundent. És una condició necessària per fer possible la connexió, per fer possible el vincle, l'aprenentatge, la resiliència. Hem d'evitar, per tant, que hi hagi els privilegiats i els exclosos de la tecnologia. I aquí el paper de la pròpia comunitat, de la biblioteca, dels museus, és primordial. Allà on no hi arribi el centre educatiu, hi ha d'altres agents comunitaris que probablement, i a més ho hem vist, tenen capacitat de donar resposta i d'ajudar a tancar aquesta bretxa digital. I finalment, un últim repte també que hem consensuat té a veure amb la qualitat, amb la innovació, amb la necessitat de revisar les estratègies educatives per respondre millor les necessitats emergents. Cal, i això ens ho dèieu de manera també contundent, cal analitzar el que funciona i basar les nostres accions en evidències, avaluar el que fem per poder replicar-ho en altres contextos. També cal establir estàndards de qualitat. Ara també ens parlava la Bela sobre aquest tema. Estàndards de qualitat comuns entre els diversos actors que proposem activitats educatives tant dintre com fora de l'horari lectiu. Tots aquests esforços s'han d'articular en polítiques i és veritat que aquí tenim un repte encara important, però hi estem treballant i esteu treballant de valent per fer-ho possible. I la pregunta que ens fem és quina pinta tenen aquestes polítiques. Doncs bé, aquestes polítiques s'assemblaran en part amb moltes de les iniciatives que s'han presentat durant aquests dies de la mà d'ajuntaments, entitats socials i de centres educatius. Per exemple, s'assemblaran a la proposta d'Educació 360 de l'Ajuntament de Viladecans o al Consellet d'Adolescents de Palau d'Anglesola o el passaport adonauta que implementa l'Ajuntament de la Bisbal i d'altres ajuntaments o el projecte Relat de la Fundació Gentis o el Raval Estiu Educatiu de la Fundació Tot Raval o el model d'extraescolars compartides dels barris de Santa Eugènia o Sant Narcís o el projecte Ítaca de la UAB. Tenim molts exemples i tots aquests exemples ens han d'ajudar a construir aquesta política del futur. I com es fa això de cristal·litzar aquests reptes en polítiques? Doncs no hi ha una altra manera, i això també ho dèiem a la jornada de l'any passat, que això només es fa fent, es fa caminant i preguntant-nos constantment com fer les activitats educatives més riques, com arribar als infants que més ho necessiten, com garantim que totes les activitats siguin de qualitat. Com hem vist al llarg de la jornada, no es tracta de tenir la gran política pública que resolgui tots els nostres reptes, sinó de tenir clar l'horitzó, i això també ha anat sortint, el propòsit i anar implementant mesures que ens portin cap aquí. El que sí aspirem és a construir, imaginar col·lectivament amb vosaltres aquesta política educativa del futur i volem que tot el que hem fet col·lectivament i el que hem compartit durant aquests dies a la jornada ens serveixi de brúixola, de guia per fer-ho possible. Nosaltres continuarem treballant amb vosaltres i esperem que vosaltres continueu també compartint, inspirant-nos, no només a mi, és a dir, com a directora de l'Aliança, sinó especialment entre tots els aliats que formem part de l'Aliança Educació 360. En tot cas, no vull acabar la jornada sense donar les gràcies, especialment a vosaltres per la generositat que heu tingut, els que heu compartit amb nosaltres reptes, iniciatives i reflexions. Sense vosaltres la jornada no hagués estat possible. També moltes gràcies als companys i companyes de les xarxes territorials de l'Educació 360 que ha fet possible les jornades, l'Albert, l'Ester, l'Òscar, la Teresa, la Xènia i especialment moltes gràcies al Pep Prats i a la Núria Dunyó, que tot i estar sovint a l'ombra també han estat una part molt important de l'ànima d'aquesta jornada. Moltes gràcies a tots. Seguirem convocant-nos, cridant-vos a l'acció i proposant-nos nous reptes, però també noves metodologies i nous models i esperem que vosaltres també vulgueu comptar amb nosaltres. Fins a la propera jornada o fins aquí a pocs dies perquè tindrem algunes sorpreses preparades, començant per al tema de l'estiu enriquit. Moltes gràcies.